Good evening, everybody. My name is Bob Seiden-Schwartz. I'm the president for the Montana World Affairs Council, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening on behalf of the Montana World Affairs Council and the Montana World Trade Center with Arnie Sherman. Wonderful turnout here tonight. We will get started here very shortly. Just a few little items of housekeeping. I'd like to thank several of the sponsors that have made this possible. Washington Group, Milt Destopoulos with Destopoulos, McDonald and Lind, First Interstate Bank, Nissan Motors for providing the transportation and safety for our guests this day and tomorrow. And also like to thank Dirk and Kim Visser from Allegiance Benefits Group. Without this type of sponsorship and your support, a couple of quick words. The Montana World Affairs Council is a nonpartisan organization. We are not connected to the University of Montana. We receive no funding other than through some grants and mostly through your participation as members and participants in these types of meetings. So it's your participation that makes it possible to have this kind of turnout on an event that's important as this evening is. I'd like to say something that really, to me, brings home why we're here tonight and the significance of this. Are there some students here tonight from Troy, Montana? Did they come down? Okay, would you please stand up? I know this is just a little bit maybe hard to do, but ladies and gentlemen, I think it's pretty obvious, but I'll still say, why is this important? These students drove down from Troy. For those of you who do not know where Troy is, it's up in the northwest corner of the state. What is it, about 5-6 hour drive? 3.5, still quite significant. They have taken the time to come down from Troy for an event such as this. So if we need to ask the question, why is this important? What is it meaning to you and I as citizens of Missoula and Montana, remembering that the Council's mission is to bring the world to Montana, to bring very complex issues, and to bring the very best people we can to try to have the dialogue so that we're involved in these issues. And I want to thank again the students from Troy, Montana, and their teacher for making this trip down, because you are the purpose for why we're here tonight. Just a few quick words. We've had the opportunity to spend all day with the ambassador. He came in last night with his spouse, Anna, and Marvy yesterday at 11:30 at night, which means they didn't even get to the hotel room until probably 12:30, 1 o'clock. I don't want to guess what time they may have been asleep, but we've been running him hard all day. And I want to thank him, his family, and Marvy for taking the time to come out here to Montana. And they've met some wonderful people. And I think they've gotten a sense of what Montana is and its people are. Pretty special place. So without further ado, I want to introduce Arnie Sherman, the director for the Montana World Trade Center. And thank you very much for your participation. Great turnout tonight, folks. Thank you very much.
Couldn't be a more timely event, right? I mean, the moon and the stars have to line up to have a topic presented at a time in which every day in the past weeks in the newspaper, there's discussion of Greece and Italy and the euro and the role of the European Union, something that shows once again, that the integration and the globalization of our economies. The EU and the United States have the most integrated economic relationship in the world. We have about $3 trillion worth of mutual investment. 15 million jobs, both in the EU and the United States, are dependent on the economic relationship. It's, just to put it in the proper perspective, our investment, the United States investment in the EU is 3 times the investment in all of Asia. It's 1/2 of the world's GNP. It's 800 million people working and trading and doing business together. Last year, in goods and services between the two countries, the $900 billion worth of trade. Bring it down to our local level here in Montana, there are about 3,000 jobs in our state that are dependent on European Union and Montana trade. About $160 million worth of exports from our state goes to European Union countries. All of that is reason enough in some ways to be here tonight to pay attention to what's taking place and unfolding almost on a minute-by-minute basis in the Greek economy, in the Italian economy, and other economies in the EU. And we have no better person probably in the world to be here tonight to try to explain what's going on and what the future looks like than the Ambassador João Vale de Almeida. His background, he spent probably since 1982 working for the European Commission. He's worked on a number of assignments, including being Chief of Staff to the European Commission President Barroso. He has spent a considerable amount of time in detailed involvement in the G8 and the G20 meetings, which you all know are critical to the economic vitality and livelihood of a cross-section of countries around the world. He's in his previous experience, he spent 7 years as a journalist, comes out of a school background out of Portugal. And we've spent the day today going from meeting to meeting, and his articulation and his insight into the current situation is astounding. So without any further introduction, I'd like you to join me in welcoming the ambassador to the stage.
Good evening, and thank you for taking me out of Washington. Not because that I don't like Washington, great city, great place, but because I prefer Missoula, Montana. And I prefer to engage with people like you, and particularly young people coming from so far away to have a dialogue with us here tonight, than I do with other people, and I will not mention them. But they are basically, diplomats, officials, politicians back in Washington, back in Brussels. Much better to be here. And I'm extremely happy to have this opportunity tonight, as I had throughout the day, to engage with you, have a frank dialogue and a frank exchange on issues that are of common interest. I'd like to thank the World Affairs Council and the World Trade Center, Bob and Arnie, for organizing this, and many people behind them, and the University of Montana, and all of those that are here tonight. Let me start by saying what I represent. Why am I in Washington? Why am I here today? Because it's important that we put things in a context, that we understand, what happens before, in order to really grasp the events of the day. And I say this particularly to the younger part of this audience. What I represent in Washington is one of the greatest achievements of mankind in recent times. And one should not be afraid of the words. Europeans have been killing each other, or one another, as you like to put it, in good English, for centuries. Sometimes in the late 50s, they decided to stop that. With the help of Americans, they started building what we call the European dream, which is also an American dream, which is to create the foundations for peace and prosperity in Europe. We don't want French killing Germans, German killing Italians, and Britain coming to the rescue with the help of Britain, with the help of America, to stop all this. We don't want this again. We don't want millions of people dying in the First and Second World War, which were in fact European civil wars. We want to move away from that. And in order to move away from that, we started in the late 50s this project of the European integration. It was called initially in European Community. It's now a European Union. But you call it what you want. These are bureaucratic words and expressions. What counts here is the idea behind it. What do we want to achieve? And that we should never forget because otherwise nothing makes sense. And if you listen today to the news, you see a lot of noise coming out of Europe. You know, one prime minister against the president, different and difficult discussions inside the government of a single country. You hear a lot about Germany not wanting to do this or that, or the French presidency trying to impose things on Mrs. Merkel, and she resists. And then comes David Cameron and says, I'm not in the euro, but you know, you get your act together, otherwise I will suffer from it. So what is going on there? And then you listen to other countries who are not inside the euro and say, I also have to have a say in this, so what the hell is going on? And you don't understand, and you just say, okay, these Europeans, they are either crazy or they are not capable of sorting out their problems. And you know, before you reach those negative conclusions about Europeans, just think one moment, what is really at stake in here is the stability, the prosperity, peace in this continent. And because Europe is so important in the world today, it's also about stability, prosperity in the wider global scene. And I think the importance of having so many people tonight coming, listen to me and talking to me about Europe is it shows how relevant it is for all of us to consider the world as a global entity. And again, talking to the younger part of this audience, I mean, you exchange through social media, you are in contact with people well beyond your neighborhood, well beyond your town, well beyond your state. And this is a powerful tool for you to get engaged and connected with others. So think about that in terms of the global economy. And when you buy your iPhone or you buy your iPad or your parents help you buying all of this, which I hope they do, think about what's behind that, you know, in terms of the interconnection and the interdependence of our economies. And then if you push your reasoning to further down, you will realize that what happens in China, in Greece, or in Brazil is as important for you living in Missoula or Troy as what happens next door, because we are in this together. This is a globalized economy through communication and technology, through instant exchanges of millions of dollars and euros across the world in a second. We have become interdependent. And when you are interdependent, you need to join efforts to find solutions for the problems. And this is how we should look at things today when we think about Europe. We should think in terms of what Europeans are doing among themselves to achieve the goals I briefly outlined, and you have to think that Europeans are not alone, they are not isolated. They have to do with you as much as we have to do with China, as much as we are affected by whatever happens in China today. So we need to look at this, you know, turbulence in Europe as part of our own turbulence, as part of our own world, a situation that requires that we all try to find solutions for the problem. So let me explain a little bit, from my point of view, what is happening in Europe. Let me say how I think Europe will overcome this situation. And let me stress the importance of us working together. So why is there a crisis in Europe? Rather, why is there a sovereign debt crisis in the euro area, which is the right way of defining this problem? First of all, because we had a very severe financial crisis in 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009. This crisis, which almost brought the world to a financial meltdown, was extremely serious. For those who have less of a historic memory, this was the worst crisis since the 30s in the previous century. And like all crises, like an earthquake, there are aftershocks of the crisis. We tried to deal with it, and I worked on that in the G20. We dealt with the immediate effects of the crisis, but we knew that this crisis would have aftershocks. And these aftershocks have been felt particularly in the area of public finances. What are public finances? It's basically how much do you get from taxes and other revenues for the state, and how much you spend to address the issues of concern. And you either have a balance or a surplus, or most likely in this case you have a deficit. So you are spending more than you have. And like in any family, this is not a good situation to be in, at least not for too long. The other issue is that in order to finance this kind of situation, you borrow money outside. And by borrowing money, you develop a debt. And today, in our countries, we have both budgetary deficit, that is, you spend more each year than you are capable of financing, and you are increasing your debt because these mechanisms are, they never stop. They can be a vicious circle in which you get involved. So this is fundamentally the problem or the most important problem we are facing today in Europe and in the US. And if you look at the figures and the average figures for Europe and the US, in fact, the US is worse off than Europe, both in budgetary deficit and public debt. The figures for the US are worse than for Europe. The problem with Europe, and I'm addressing now the second justification for this crisis, is that this public finances impact of the crisis was particularly acute in the most vulnerable countries of the European Union, and particularly the most vulnerable countries among the 17 that have a common currency, the euro. We talked about Greece, we can talk about my own country, Portugal, or Ireland. They were particularly affected by this because they were sort of the weak links of our group of countries. And because we are an integrated group of countries, if you have a problem in one element of it, it can potentially have a systemic impact. It can have an influence, a negative influence on the system, because they are so integrated. In Europe there are no borders inside the European Union. People can circulate freely, capitals can circulate freely, services can circulate freely, goods can circulate freely. So economies are very much interconnected. So if you have a problem in one country because of the effects of the crisis, it has an impact on the others. So this is another reason for this crisis, apart from the global financial crisis. But if you have an integrated space like the one we have, and you have countries that have a level of development and competitiveness very different from others, again, take the case of Greece and Germany, this aggravates the problem, because these countries are less capable of finding the way out of this crisis. So another reason for the situation we have here today. And finally, we were caught in this situation because, and we must recognize that, the mechanisms that we have established when we launched the euro were not fully adapted to this kind of situation. And without going too technical, but basically we had a single currency, the euro, a single central bank, European Central Bank, a single monetary policy, when you decide whether or not you devalue your currency, when you decide what kind of interest rate the economy should have, when you decide what kind of inflation target you should respect. All this is done in an integrated way, in a single way. But we did not create two things that were also necessary. One is that mechanisms that the budgetary policy, the fiscal policy of each of the members of the group are equally integrated as the monetary policy is. So we created an imbalance in which countries that were using the euro and following the monetary policy determined by the central bank were actually having divergent fiscal policies. And some of these countries went into a path of increased deficit, increased debt, and sustainable levels of deficit and debt, which turned out to be detrimental to the solidity of the entire area in which they are integrated, the euro area. So, you have another reason for this crisis. And secondly, this area was not fully equipped in terms of the way we take decisions, the governance dimension, right? We were not adapted to this kind of situation. So we were faced with a crisis inside the euro area having an impact in the whole system. This is what happened more or less a year ago. And since then, or 18 months ago, since then we've taken all the steps necessary, courageous steps, unprecedented steps to deal with this crisis. And I want to underline this because sometimes it is overlooked over here. What we did up to now was unthinkable 2 years ago. It was unthinkable 2 years ago that countries would accept that before they approve a budget for the following year, they have to go through a multilateral surveillance discussion with other partners. That is, if you take the case of America and imagine that you are integrated with Mexico in the same kind of economic and monetary union, before you approve your budget for next year, you have to ask the opinion of Mexico. Nothing against Mexico, I'm just using your neighbor. But to give you an idea that these countries in Europe, Portugal, to take my own country, before they approve the budget for 2012, they have to discuss it with the other members of the euro area, because the decisions they will take on their own budget, as we've seen by my earlier explanation and the events in Greece, has an impact on the others. So there have to be mechanisms to accommodate the common interest in each decision taken by the individual member states of the euro area. So we have done a lot, and I could go very long, that's not the purpose tonight, on everything Europe has done or did up to now to address this crisis. But we realized a few weeks ago that this was not enough, that we needed to go even further. And that's what we are discussing today. And we are focused, media is focusing now on two countries, Greece and Italy. Why? Well, Greece, because it's been part of the problem for some months. We have been applying a very rigorous and drastic program of reforms in Greece. But of course, in times of difficulty, public opinion has the right in democracy to protest, to demonstrate, to disagree. And this has created a lot of tension in the Greek political system. And it brought the government down, basically. And the Prime Minister has decided to resign, and they are now discussing the way forward. Most likely elections in a couple of months, most likely an interim government. They are now discussing what kind of government with which Prime Minister. So this is the issue now. That's why, again, Greece is on the front pages, because all of this has a political dimension. All of this has political consequences. Why is Italy now on the front pages? Because markets were not reassured by the measures taken by the Italian government in recent months, and they were penalizing Italy for that. We discussed the issue inside Europe, together with the IMF as well, and we agreed that Italy had to push for another set of reforms, which the Prime Minister did through Parliament. In this process, he lost the majority he had for support for the government, and he decided to resign. Again, political consequences of a difficult economic and financial situation in Italy. But if you consider these two situations, but if you consider whatever Europe has been doing and what we are ready to do as from now, you will realize that the process is continuing. There is turbulence, there are political events all along the way, but the course of Europe is towards setting these problems, implementing the solutions for these problems. So I believe, as I speak to you today, and I want to be clear in my message, Europe is doing its homework. Europe is implementing the measures necessary to get out of this crisis, and we are doing it by deepening the integration, by going back to our project that I talked to you about. I believe that Europe will come out of this crisis more integrated rather than less integrated. that we are moving forward in our project to have an ever closer union inside the European territory. Some of us say, and I'm not using the expression, I'm quoting, that maybe Europe is moving towards a fiscal union. I don't know. What I know is that everything we are deciding will lead us to more integration. So Europe will be more together than before this crisis, and will be closer to what some call a fiscal union, where there are mechanisms of solidarity inside the members of this union. So this is, in a nutshell, and I hope I was not too complex technically, and I tried to simplify some of these concepts, why we say that Europe is today, or the euro area has today, a crisis. So how does this affect the US? Why should we be discussing this in Missoula, Montana, of all places and of all themes? Well, again, because, as Arne said earlier, our economies are extremely interconnected. We are each other's best and most important partners, not China, European Union and the US. We have more than 50% of world GDP, more than 40-something% of world's trade. You invest more in the Netherlands than you do in China and India together, and there are all sorts of comparisons that show the relevance and the importance and the centrality of this relationship from an economic term. But also in terms of values, we are each other's best friends. We share the values of democracy, individual freedom, protection of human rights. Where do you have this degree of common values in the world? There are a few other countries, of course, Canada, Australia, maybe Japan, a few countries in Latin America. Okay, I don't deny that. But also from an historic point of view, this is the strongest existing relationship in the world between the two most important economic blocs in the world. But most of all, because of the reasons I identified earlier. Today's economy is a globalized one. You cannot understand the problems in Missoula, Montana, if you don't understand the wider context. And again, for the younger people, keep your eyes open. Look at the big picture. Nothing is explainable without having that into perspective. And if these kind of debates serve some purpose, which I hope they do, for me the most important one is to raise the awareness for the importance of world affairs. And these two institutions represented here have exactly that purpose, and I'm very glad to contribute to that. So what is going to happen next, before we move to a dialogue, which is, of course, more interesting than a speech? Well, first we should not be complacent about the problems. And I'm not telling you that everything is perfect in Europe. As I hope you will not tell me that everything is perfect in the United States. But maybe you will, and I'm ready to accept. But something tells me that you won't. We are facing difficult problems, and should not be complacent about it. Our societies, industrialized or post-industrialized society, are facing huge problems. I mean, demography is not helping us. We are not producing enough babies, certainly not in Europe. You are doing a better job than us on that. We are not being competitive enough in the world economy. We are not investing enough in research and innovation and education. We have welfare systems that are unsustainable. I'm not sure that my children will have the guarantee of pensions that I have today. Maybe even my own rights, I hope they will be okay, but you don't know. Because if you look at the figures, and that's the same for the US and the EU, and I think it's slightly worse for the US, but I don't want to make too much comparison there, we need to look at that. So there are a number of issues that our countries need to address that are common to the countries with this kind of development. So we should not be complacent about it, and we should work together about it. And what we have been trying to do in the G8, in the G20, in the IMF, in the United Nations as well, is to first realize that we are in this together, resist the temptation of throwing the stone to the neighbor, or finger pointing at the neighbor or the distant neighbor, and blaming others for our problems. That's not a way to find solutions. Solution is to get together, try to realize what the problems we have, and find solutions. And that's what we've been doing, the G20 summit in Cannes a week ago. It's a process that will take time, because we are bringing together for the first time the new kids in the block. Not you coming from all the way to over here. The new kids are China, Brazil, India, very soon Indonesia and Vietnam. These are the new kids in the block. And we need them to share the problem so that we can share the solution. They are part of the problem as much as they should be part of the solution, and they have to assume their responsibilities. So once again, these are global problems that require global solutions. And my last point is to say that in this search for the solutions of Europe, the solutions for the problems in the US, the solutions for the problem of the international economy, there is one hardcore relationship that I hope will be at the center of solutions, and that is the transatlantic one, between the EU and the US. I think we have a lot to give, a lot to contribute, because at the end of the day, it is for the sake of our own citizens that we should do that. It's for the sake of the promotion of our values that we should do that. And we should be, by the way, very happy with the events in the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, we have the fall of the Iron Curtain. Millions and millions of people that were under the Soviet empire have joined the European Union. Worldwide, millions of people have come out of poverty in China, in India, in Brazil. The political regimes in these countries have evolved. We had many years of military dictatorship in Brazil. It's now a fully fledged democracy. India is a fully fledged democracy, the biggest democracy in the world. China is opening up. Vietnam is opening up. Africa is moving slower than other countries in the right direction. In Latin America, like it or not, there is only one head of state who is not democratically elected. All the others are. They are not perfect democracies, but at least they have been elected and not. So, the values that we share between the EU and the US are gaining ground in the world. So we should be confident in our capacity to move the world to become a better place, and we should continue to cooperate in order to find solutions for this problem. Europe is doing its homework. We know we can count on the US, and I hope that if I come back next year, if you invite me, I will have better news from Europe, because I'm absolutely confident that we will overcome this situation. Thank you.
We're going to now open this up to questions. There are two mics in the front here by the railing, so if people want to ask questions, please come down to the microphones. We do ask that you put your thoughts in the form of a question. If it's a long commentary, we suggest you write a blog. We would like to also open this up out of consideration for our young students who came here from Troy. Are you prepared to ask a question or two tonight? I had you guys down for an A+. I'm pulling that back to an A. So if there is a question, we'd like to give you that opportunity. If not, please come down and we'll take questions for the ambassador. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'm heard well. Ambassador, thank you so kindly for coming all the way across the continent to visit with us. A couple of questions. First of all, you mentioned very briefly the role of the emerging markets, the emerging economies in this entire fiscal process. I wonder if you can elaborate more on what your specific thoughts are as to what their responsivity to this should be. That's question one. And the second one having to do with the role of eventually a fiscal reform in Europe, somewhat akin to the monetary reform that occurred with the evolution of the euro. And again, I wonder if you could be a bit more specific as to where you see this moving. Do you see this as a more informal fiscal agreements between states, or a really true formal fiscal relationship across the continent?
Okay, shall I take the first one? Okay, on the can I move around a little bit, or is this this is not a town hall meeting, and I'm not going to ask you to vote for me, and but not yet, at least. No. So where are you? Sorry, you moved. Yeah. On the emerging economies, I think when you gain power and influence, you get more markets, you make more money, you improve the quality of life of your citizens, you become a world partner, you're invited to the big table, and that's all good. But it comes with a price. And the price is that you have to assume part of the responsibility of governing the world. And what we are asking countries in China, Brazil, or India is to assume that part of responsibility, and to say that they have to be ready to engage in solutions for climate change. They have to engage in fighting nuclear proliferation. They have to engage with us in fighting terrorism and all the threats that are common to our world. We want them to realize that if Europe is unstable, this will not be good for that prospects of exporting to Europe. And if the United States is not in a good shape, it's not good for them because they hold part of your debt and they want to trade with you and invest here and sell their merchandise here. But also that if they want to be part and benefit from the world economy, they have to go by the book. They have to apply the principle of the rule of law. They cannot at the same time want us to invest there and then try to, I'm not accusing anybody in particular, but we're talking in abstract, but steal our intellectual property. I mean, one needs to be clear about that, or allow cyber attacks to have an origin in these territories. So again, I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but I understand that you see my point. You cannot have the cake and eat it too. You can have part of the cake, but then you have maybe to pay for part of the cake. And you have to make sure that you clean up the kitchen after you've baked the cake and after you've eaten the slice that is yours legitimately. So I think this is what we are asking our friends. We want the success of China and Brazil and India and all these countries. Again, it's because they are endorsing our own values. They are moving in the direction of better societies, more egalitarian societies, and we should support that. And we need their markets. We need to sell cars to China. We need to sell computers and iPads to China and Brazil and India. We need them to play a part in the world governance. I think they are doing so, increasingly so, and I'm happy to see that. But we would all like them to be a little bit more on the responsibility side in sharing the solution for some of these problems. About Europe and your question on fiscal union and developments now, I think we are moving very fast in that direction, in the sense that, as I said earlier, countries are accepting the need to share with others decisions that so far have been their own. And I don't know exactly how this will materialize, it's too soon to say. But I think we are moving forward, and very fast, towards more sophisticated mechanisms. And this will have a political impact as well. And I think the challenge will be, as we move on the technical ground towards more sophisticated solutions, to be sure that politically, public opinion supports it, public opinion understands, and for that we need, of course, politicians and people in government and the opposition to be able to explain why we're doing this. And I hope that will be the case.
Just on. So, Ambassador, my question concerns the euro. So, is the euro a net benefit for weaker countries in the European bloc? You have Germany, relatively educated population, heavily focused on exports, and then weaker countries like Portugal, who would have a weaker currency than otherwise. So, has the euro been a net benefit for the weaker countries?
The figures show that Europe has been a benefit for both big and small countries, central and peripheral countries, if you want to categorize them in this way. And when you are assessing the benefits, you always have to think about the if-not scenario. What is the alternative for it? What's the cost of non-euro, as we say in our debate in Europe? And the cost of the non-euro would have been huge for particularly the small countries. Imagine countries like Portugal or Greece, or even smaller countries in Europe, going through the financial crisis of 2008 without the benefit of belonging to a strong currency, the euro. Imagine the turbulence in financial markets because of the impact of the crisis in the currencies of these small countries if they were outside the euro. So we always have to see the other side of the coin. And clearly here, and I think no one disputes this, the euro has been beneficial for this country, overall. Now, as it is obvious with this crisis, not everything is perfect in the euro area, and not everything is perfect with the euro. And some people say that for some of these countries, the euro, or the membership of the euro area, using the euro, benefiting from the monetary policy, the low level of interest rates, was somehow an illusion. Suddenly these countries thought that they were rich, or richer than they really are. They are rich countries. I mean, by the way, we are talking here about our countries. We are part of the privilege of this world. Privilege of this world. If you consider the situation in Africa and parts of Asia and parts of Latin America, we are privileged. Even the poorer countries in Europe, and I'm speaking to the younger people here, I mean, you are privileged. I tell this to my children. You are super privileged. We sometimes tend to forget that with our own little problems. But Europe, or the US, and every country in Europe is considered a rich country in international terms. And we should never forget that. But these countries felt that they were even richer than they are, because they were benefiting from this protection of the euro. But from that point of view, maybe it was a little bit an illusion. And I think people are now realizing that, that is not exactly true. I think people will come out of this crisis with a better sense of the reality of things. But I have no doubts to say that the euro has been beneficial for small countries as much as it has been beneficial for countries like Germany. And we could elaborate that further down the road, but that is a clear point for me.
Obviously, most of European nations have these really large social programs to benefit their citizens. And my question is, especially since at the beginning of the lecture you mentioned that most of these nations are spending more than they're taking in,
For what?
Most of the nations are spending more than they're taking in. how would you suggest that these economies have been better set up or set up more strong? Would you have kept these social programs established, or would you have maybe changed how they were set up in the nations?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the biggest challenges for our economies is to maintain a welfare system, basically taking care of those in need, providing social protection, providing safety nets for people that may fall into difficult situations, while at the same time being able to pay for it. So in simple terms, we have promised too much with the means we have, for different reasons, and it will take us too long to identify all the reasons. But today, in the US and in most of Europe, we are not capable of saying today that we can guarantee everything we promised to everybody in our societies. So the debate going on is about how to redress this imbalance. Some of it has to do with the effectiveness and efficiency of the systems. We know that we are wasting too much time in some of these programs. We know that we are giving maybe money to people that do not necessarily need it, while at the same time not giving enough to those who really need it. I see the debate here in the US about this, as much as I see in Europe. So there's an issue about how well managed these programs are. There's an issue about what kind of effort is required to finance these problems, and the whole discussion about the age of retirement, retirement age. When should my generation retire in order to make sure that my children will have access to the same kind of entitlements that I have? Again, I'm oversimplifying, but this is the kind of issues that we need to discuss. In Europe, it is now clear that we have to work longer if we want our children to benefit at least from more or less the same level of social protection. But, you know, in Greece, it took this crisis for a big change in the pension reform. In some countries, there are discussions moving from 60 to 62, where in Germany, for instance, they are already at 67. And of course, when the German people say, I'm working until 67, and there's another country that I'm going to help that is still discussing moving from 60 to 62, of course you create a problem in the public opinion. So this is the kind of debate that we are having today. I'm not going to comment on the situation in the United States. I just observe that there is an ongoing debate about how to redress this problem. We are looking with interest to the solutions that you will find, and we are ready to apply them back home. And we hope that you look at ours and maybe get some inspiration as well from what we are doing, because the problem is fundamentally the same with different degrees of intensity. But these are some of the big problems that we need to address if we want to be loyal to our values, which include protect those in need, take care of those who are left behind as we progress in economic prosperity in our countries.
If I'm not mistaken, Standard & Poor's just downgraded the credit rating of several countries in the Eurozone. Obviously, that's a bad thing, but how will that affect the recovery of these countries going into the future?
Well, it's true that the rating agencies have been downgrading some of our economies, some of our companies. And there is a big debate in Europe about the rating agencies, I can tell you. A little bit here, but much more in Europe. And there are people really thinking that rating agencies are part of the problem. Some would like them to be simply scrapped, at least regulated. Some say that they have interest in the companies that they rate, and you know, there's a whole debate in Europe about that. The fact being that the market has to assess companies and economies, and they have to assess economies because, you know, the economies or countries have bonds that are in the market that they want people to buy. So there has to be mechanisms for the market to assess the level of risk that investors are taking, one way or the other, rating agencies or any other mean. So I think the debate is normal, is acceptable, is useful, but it's much more important to go at the root cause of this problem. And the root cause is, of course, the competitiveness, the sustainability of our economies. Your question is it affecting these countries? Yes. We hope that by the measures we are taking, the markets will be reassured and that this will translate in the level of rating.
Earlier, oh, here we go. So you mentioned earlier that you were monitoring the way that we were going to deal with our budget crisis or our budget deficit. What was your opinion when we decided to raise the debt ceiling?
The what, sorry?
When we decided to raise the debt ceiling, what was your opinion?
Well, I wrote about that to my authorities in Brussels, but I cannot repeat what I wrote. Not because it was bad about the US, but because of diplomatic respect and rules. Now, I think it's an important debate. It's a very lively debate, and I've learned a lot about this country and the problems you have through this debate. I don't want to qualify any element of that debate. I will just underline that it shows how important it is that we find solutions for these problems. It shows the centrality of the public finances issue in our countries. But it also shows that we need to find solutions. And I go back to Europe because I don't want to comment too much on your situation, but it requires, take the case of Greece, take the case of Portugal, where we had to ask for a rescue, or Portugal had to ask for a rescue program from the EU and IMF. There was a negotiation on the program. The government who was negotiating, lost support in Parliament. We had to go for elections. And one of the strengths of the Portuguese case today is that both the former party in government, who is now in opposition, and the two parties who are now in government and were previously in the opposition, the three of them signed the agreement. That is, the three of them reached the consensus on what needs to be done to address a central problem of a country. So I'm talking about Portugal, not talking about the US.
You mentioned in your speech that countries should come together in terms of finding a solution. And what do you think the U.S. should play a role in that, in coming to find the solution?
Well, the U.S. is playing a role in finding a solution for the problems in Europe and for the overall problems of the world's economy, directly by engaging with us in a bilateral dialogue, but also multilaterally, inside the G20 and inside the IMF. Well, the IMF is and there are people here that had responsibilities in IMF, so I'm very modestly and humbly mentioning this, but the IMF is the central instrument that the world economy has to address some of these problems. And the IMF has been instrumental and extremely useful in dealing with some of these problems, including inside Europe. As I said, these rescue programs or assistance programs to the countries that I mentioned are jointly managed by the EU and the IMF. And of course, the United States is a major contributor to the IMF and plays an extremely important role. There is another way for the US to help, which is, of course, to move forward in its growth, is to redress the problems of its own economy. That's the best way each of us can contribute. Europe can contribute by solving its own problems, by moving the economy forward, by creating more jobs and more growth. China has to contribute in different ways. Each of us, members of the international community, have to contribute bilaterally, multilaterally, and by solving our own problems. And this is how I see the contribution of the United States in different levels of intervention.
You mentioned a number of times the need for the economic recovery and furthering the economies, and the excuse me, the root reason for, as far as the governments are concerned, for that is that's the easiest and best way to increase your taxes to balance your budgets. In this country, many of the high-paying industrial jobs have been moved to other countries. Has the European Union also seen this happen to their high-paying jobs, i.e. they went to China, India, wherever, and they're no longer in the United States or the European Union?
I understand your question is an important question. I'm not sure the answer is an easy one. And it starts by the concept that we use. You know, a few decades ago, it was very easy to say this is an American car, or this is a Taiwanese smartphone. A few decades ago, there were not smartphones, but you replace it by something else. It was easy to understand where the product came from, because we knew that it was produced in Detroit or southern France or whatever. Today, I challenge you to tell me where your iPhone comes from, or you know, your T-shirt or your shoes, because you know it's. And I was listening to today. I was meeting with a Washington group of companies here in Montana, and they, you know, they were telling me how interconnected they are with several parts of the world. So the concepts that we use are very complex. So it's very difficult to say this is a Chinese product that moved from the US to China, so I lost jobs here to China. In some cases that is true. In most cases, very difficult to prove and very complex to understand. We had a debate in Europe we still have, but I was in a different position that time, and I had to follow that closely, about anti-dumping duties against China products. Anti-dumping duties are when we find that a product is produced by some country at the price which is lower than the cost, just for the sake of gaining market shares in the importing country, we call it dumping. And we are, according to international rules, allowed to investigate, and if proven right, to intervene and force these countries to pay more. Okay. And we had a debate in Europe about that, and we realized that there were more companies in Europe wanting us to let these products come in than those that wanted us to impose the anti-dumping duties. Because there were more people benefiting from the lower cost of these imports than there were being affected by their coming into our market. And if you push this reasoning a bit further, you say that maybe there are more jobs being created by the arrival of these competitive products from other countries than that are being lost because of competition from them. I'm not saying this is the case for everything. I'm just giving you another little different way of looking at the same problem. But if you enlarge the scope of your reasoning and you consider that by importing these competitive products from an emerging economy, you are developing in that economy new consumers that will eventually buy your products, and that because of that you are creating jobs in your own state that will compensate for the lost jobs potentially lost by, you know, I'm being a little bit over pedagogical here also because of our younger people. I think we need to look at these realities which are much more complex than they used to be in a more sophisticated way. You know, there are no simple solutions for complex problems. And that's what we're seeing too much in our public debate. is that you have people saying, you simply have to do this, without thinking of the consequences of simply doing that. And the consequences may turn out to be very negative for us, and sometimes more negative for us than for them. So, this being said, the underlying problem in your question is the issue of competitiveness. How competitive are we, and in what areas? Are we ready to fully abandon manufacturing in our economies, which is more or less or was up to a certain time the consensus, something that we are condemned to? I don't know. There is a debate now about reindustrializing here and there, reintroducing manufacturing. We need to look at all that, and that's the kind of issues that we need to discuss, not only inside the US, not only inside Europe, but among the two of us and with the emerging economies.
All right, hello. Not to change the subject too much off of economics, which is obviously the topic du jour, but keeping in the spirit of growth, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the continued expansion of the EU, specifically and obviously into potentially Turkey or in Morocco as well. Thank you.
Well, I like to say that, now beginning with the facts, the European Union started with 6 countries, basically around France and Germany, as a way to prevent France and Germany to enter into war again, and again having a civil war in Europe. You remember what I told you earlier. Started with 6 in 1957. We are now 27. 500 million people are part of the Union. We brought in countries that were under a dictatorship. My country, Portugal, Greece, Spain, right-wing dictatorships until the 70s for Portugal and Spain, a little bit earlier for Greece. And particularly, we brought in 12 countries that used to be 10 countries that used to be part of the Soviet Empire, plus other 2 countries. So we now have a continental dimension. We begin to bring in countries from the Balkans, former Yugoslavia countries. We have Slovenia, Croatia is about to join. So what do I want to say by this? We believe this is the most important and effective peace-building, peacekeeping, peacemaking operation in the history of mankind. Be able to stop civil wars, be able to bring down shut down a dictatorship and an empire that existed in Europe, being able to redress a very difficult situation in the Balkans, and bring all these people together in this common project. I don't know of any peace-building or peacekeeping operation as successful as this one. And we are very proud of it. We are very proud of it. And if you take the case of Poland, I don't know if there is anybody here with the Polish links or Polish origin, but if you take the case of Poland today, and you compare Poland with Poland 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you consider the turbulent history of Poland in the past, and you go to Poland today, you see the difference. NATO played a role, of course, the security dimension is very important, but the real engine of change in Poland was preparing to, and then participating in the European Union. So we want this project to continue, and we are in the process of integrating Croatia. We are negotiating with Iceland. We will start soon with Montenegro. We have prospects for other Balkan countries, and we are negotiating with Turkey. It's a more difficult case because of a number of factors. First, the size of the country. It will become the biggest country of the European Union if it joins, or when it joins. Because of their geographic location, only part of Turkey is real in the European continent, and because of the Muslim nature of the majority Muslim population in Turkey. This is creating problems inside the Union in some member states, in some parts of our public opinion. I cannot hide those problems. Other sort of problems have to do with Turkey. Turkey is not helping their case by not recognizing one of the members of the European Union, Cyprus, for reasons that we all know, the division of Cyprus and all that. So for all these reasons, negotiations have slowed down. They are practically at a stalemate today, but officially the prospect is still for Turkey to join the Union. Whatever happens in this process, and I cannot predict what will happen at the end of the day, one thing is clear for us. Turkey is a major partner of the European Union. Turkey is a regional power today. Turkey plays an extremely important role in the region. Turkey is a member of NATO, a friend of the US, as much as it is of ours. So it's an ally with which we count, with whom we want to engage. And it's, if you want my opinion, one of the most interesting cases of an emerging power in the international community. I compare it with Brazil as two very interesting case studies for how these countries came out of dictatorships, because Turkey had also military dictatorships, that have developed the economy, that have improved the social equality levels, that have improved on human rights and individual freedoms, and that are now aspiring to play a more important role in the international scene. How do we relate with them? How do we engage with them? It's a big challenge, particularly for Europe, because we are closer to Turkey than you are, but also for the US. So I don't know what will happen about Turkey's accession. It will not happen tomorrow, nor the day after, nor next week, nor next year, maybe not in the 5 years to come, but I cannot predict beyond that. But they will remain a major part of Europe, and we do want to engage with them, and I think the United States shares this position as well. Bob tells me that I can take 2 more questions, and I throughout the day I've been following his instructions very, very precisely, and I will do that again. So 2 or 3 questions, I can be a bit more liberal than he is. Please.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. As an admirer of the European project for many years, I am worried. What you see in the popular press as the solution to the difficult issues is basically what we tried in the US, which is making sure the private banking system doesn't fail, propping up the banks, and austerity. And bailing out the banks hasn't helped the US economy a whole lot that we can see, at least from Missoula. And austerity, the IMF-type programs that I'm familiar with, and working in Argentina for a while, didn't seem to work very well. And certainly are the opposite of Keynesian-type approaches to recession. What's Plan B? If that combination of bailing out the banks and austerity doesn't bring sufficient stability, the Greek, the idea that the Greek population might vote on austerity was enough to panic the financial markets. So what is, if Italy or Greece defaults, is there a plan, an organized plan for that eventuality to ease those transitions, or is it that you can explain, or is it just hoping that won't happen?
Well, there's a rule in every, people in my role here is not to reply to if questions, because that takes you to a very dangerous territory. But I understand your question, which is a more than valid one, and I try to address it. I think we in Europe, at least, believe that there is no alternative to redressing our public finances now. We don't see a way out without that. And there is a consensus in Europe among governments that that is the way forward. Now, we can discuss the intensity and the degree of the importance of the measures you take. And that debate is only normal, and you will have, and we are having opposition and demonstrations in the streets to that. But I haven't seen anyone really presenting a convincing alternative to us redressing the state of our public finances. On the issue of the banking, I mean, let me tell you that in Europe, we supported the banks, not with grants, but with loans. And some of the cases, the states are getting quite a lot of money out of that because they pay with interesting interest rate, or they lend with interesting interest rate. So it's not that people are transferring money to the banks and the banks keep the money. The banks have to pay back. And knowing the role of banks in our economies, one must think twice before saying that we should let the banks go down. Of course, we need also the banking system to be made responsible. And I think the debate in Europe, as much as here, is to say to what extent they are taking the responsibility at the level they should. There is a debate in Europe about bonuses and remunerations of bankers. There is a debate about regulation and supervision. And we have, inside the G20, done a lot to reform the regulatory framework for financial services and banking system around the world. But to simply say that we should let the banks go down means that we will let the economies go down because of their extremely important role. The debate is there, is a natural, normal debate to have, but I must say that I haven't seen in Europe any convincing alternative to these two aspects. Trying to have or prevent a financial meltdown of the banking system and addressing the issue of imbalances in public finances as the way forward, without forgetting growth, because we tend to refer less to that. But at the same time that we are doing all this, we are implementing a number of structural reforms in our economies that try to address the issue of growth and competitiveness. And we are using the crisis as the moment and the occasion to introduce those reforms. I refer to the pension system reform in Greece. It would have been impossible in normal times. I'm talking about labor market reforms in Europe, which are absolutely necessary for our economies to be more agile and more flexible. They would not have been possible in normal times. But we are also talking about reforms in supervision of the banking sector. I'm talking about reforms in the auditing business. I'm talking about reforms in the accounting business, and some link some of these issues to the financial crisis. We're talking about the reform of the rating agencies as well. We're talking about reform of many sophisticated tools in the financial markets like derivatives and over-the-counter and all this. All this is taking place in Europe and in the US. Nothing of this will be feasible politically in normal times. So we are using the crisis as an occasion to introduce structural reforms that will ultimately deliver more growth and jobs in the future. Talking about research, innovation, investing in new technologies, clean energy technologies. All this is part of creating the basis for and the bedrock for growth that needs to come. Because austerity, and I agree with you on that point, austerity doesn't make sense if it has not a purpose. And the purpose of austerity has to be growth and jobs in the next cycle of our economies. Please.
I guess we're coming to the end of the evening, but I want to thank you very much for the information you've given us. It's revealing and wonderful. In the spirit of can we help each other solve problems, we have a problem in this country that seems to be growing and is on a lot of our minds. The disparity of wealth. The very wealthy, the very poor, the decreasing middle class, kind of thing that's going on. Do you have that problem in Europe? Have you worked on it? Do you see solutions for yourself? Is there something we can learn from you folks on how we might deal with that problem?
Well, we don't pretend to have solutions for our problems, let alone for yours. We are very modest in Europe, very humble. The problems are slightly different. Our societies, I would say, are less unequal than most parts of the US, I will put it this way. Most parts of the Union are less unequal than most parts of the US, because we are very diverse, as you are in this country as well. We have also different cultures. For instance, the role of government in Europe is perceived in a different way as it is here. The discussion in Europe today is basically to say, I want the government to do more. The discussion here is fundamentally to say, I want the government to do less. So we have a different cultural approach to the role of the state, to the role of government, to the role of public services and public authorities. And that's a big difference, which has to do with your own history and our own history. The issue of inequalities is there. Again, I think less so in Europe than here, but very much in Europe. And if this crisis has one element of the public debate which is clear, is that people are, sort of challenging some of the privileges in our society. They are linking it to the banking system, you were saying, but they are linking it also to the political system, which brings another element of the debate that we didn't have time to discuss today, which is how much and how difficult it is for our liberal representative democracies to deal with all these kind of issues and finding the solutions. So we don't pretend to have solutions. What we pretend and what we want is that we discuss more, that we exchange more our best practices, and that together we come to solutions. And my last point, because there's one more question there. Is there one more question? Okay, we finish with this gentleman. Please.
Thank you. In answering a previous question, you said that both the economically stronger and weaker countries joined by the European Union can both financially benefit from their relationship in the European Union, but as there's always going to be a stronger and more successful country, in this case played by Germany, how can the European Union hope to ease the tensions created between the more prosperous and least prosperous countries?
Well, as I said earlier, Germany benefited a lot from belonging to the European Union. Smaller, weaker economies in the Union have also benefited a lot. And I think that, I have no doubts that no one in Germany doubts or challenges the fact that Germany belongs to Europe and that Europe is good for Germany. Germany plays a central role in Europe. It's the biggest economy, the most successful economy, the largest country, centrally located in the Union. And of course, it's difficult to imagine the European Union without Germany. But it's also very difficult to imagine how Germany could have achieved what they have achieved today, and we are all very happy and proud for that, without belonging to the European Union, economically and politically. If you look at the last decades in our history, after the two wars and the role of Germany in these wars, and what came after that, it is clear that the reunification of Germany a few decades ago, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, was very much a European operation. They had the political support of the other members of the Union. They had the financial support of the other members of the Union to organize this very huge operation of reunification. Germany is benefiting from an internal market of 500 million people. They could not have achieved the level of competitiveness in the world markets if they were not based in this, and they would not benefit from the scale of this internal market in Europe. And so I think there is a very strong case to be made for both Germany to continue to commit to the European Union, and for the European Union to consider that it makes no sense without a country like Germany. This being said, the whole discussion, I come back to the first question and the first point, is about us finding a solution for some of the imbalances we have inside the Union. Address the issue of diversity between less developed and more developed countries. This has to be done through mechanisms of solidarity, through mechanisms of co-responsibility. Again, a country cannot think that it's totally isolated when you are part of a system from which you benefit. You have to give and take. And this is what is being developed in Europe. And I believe that after this crisis in the euro area, you will see a Europe that is stronger and fitter than when this crisis started. That's our bet, and that's my belief. Thank you very much.